And then while we're just waiting for everyone to arrive, if you want to put your name in the chat and what organization you represent and maybe where in Vermont you're located, that'd be great for us to get a sense of who's here. Right, so I think we can get started. Diana, are you able to pull the slides up?
Yep, I'll do that right now.
Yeah. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us today for this webinar about the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative and specifically about our ARPA-funded primary producer grant. My name is Claire Salerno. I provide program support for the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative at the Agency of Agriculture, and I'm joined today by Elizabeth Sipple, who is the program lead. She's waving, and we'll all take turns, so you'll get to know us a little bit. And then Diana Ferguson, who is our grants management specialist and provides administrative support for Working Lands. You can go to the next slide.
Might be a little slow. I'm giving it a minute.
No worries. And for folks that have just joined us, if you want to put in the chat who you are and what organization you represent and where you're located, it's great to see we have folks from all kinds of sectors and all over the state. So just a brief overview of how today is going to work. I'll provide a brief overview of what the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative is, and then we'll go over the specifics of the ARPA grant and do a little tutorial about our grant application platform. If you're new to Teams, you can use the raise hand function, which is under the reactions tab at the top, on the top right of your screen, or just type a question in the chat and we'll do our best to answer them as we go, or we might hold them if we know that we'll cover them during the presentation. Sure if we've lost. There we go. So hopefully folks are a bit familiar with Working Lands and what it is that we do, but we're a program that was created in 2012 by the Vermont legislature, and we manage and invest about $1 million annually into agriculture and forestry-based businesses. Over the 10 years of the program, we've awarded $12 million to those businesses around the state. And for this current fiscal year 23, we have 1.6 million available in grant funds. And so farm and food and forest businesses around the state are involved in the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative. Folks from all of those sectors receive funds. The program is jointly run out of 3 state agencies: Agriculture, Food and Markets, Commerce and Community Development, and the Department of Forest, Parks and Recreation. There are several business assistance organizations that are involved, and that includes the Vermont Agriculture Assistance Corporation, the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, and the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board. And they sit on the Working Lands Enterprise Board, which is the body of people that make all decisions around grant awards. And they're also that board represents people from across the farm, forest, and food sectors in the state. And all of the applications, so if you submit an application, they'll be reviewed and awarded through a competitive review process guided by industry, nonprofit, and government stakeholders, both from the Working Lands Enterprise Board and just others from those areas. For bearing with our slower internet today. I know that's a challenge for many of us in Vermont. And just to provide a quick overview of how the annual Working Lands grant cycle works, it runs kind of along generally the state fiscal year, which runs from the beginning of July to the end of June. And so right now we're in the process of conducting outreach and webinars for this grant. And over the next several months, we've already released the request for application, and the applications will be open and people can apply for the ARPA grant. This is our last grant that will release this funding cycle. So if you're looking at this one and you aren't eligible, you can check back next August for the next round of grants that will be fiscal year 24 that will open after next summer. Then I'll pass it to Elizabeth, who is our program lead for Working Lands, for the next section to talk about the specifics of the ARPA grant.
Diana, do you think that we should switch because of the should I try my bandwidth with the presentation? What do you think?
Yeah, you're welcome to. If you, I will, I can
Or
change it over to you.
Is it working now? Try to switch a slide. Let's see if it's okay. Well, that seemed better. Yeah, so now let's talk about why we are truly all here today. So we have the ARPA Primary Producer Impact Grant, which was released at the end of last week. And I think actually, can you go to the next slide, Diana?
Yes. Probably. Thanks for bearing with us with our limited bandwidth today.
Okay, well, if it is still okay, let me share my. Okay, here we go. All right, so here, this is the full timeline for the ARPA funded primary producer grant. I think the most important thing to highlight is that this grant opportunity is there's a pre-application, and then if you are successful in the pre-application process, you will be invited back to participate in the full application. The deadline for pre-applications is December 16th. And then the final estimated project date is in June 2023. And I also just wanted to mention that, due to time, we aren't going into detail with every slide, but these slides will be available, and we can share the link. All right, let's go to the next slide. And just as we're waiting for the next slide to come up, and pre-application, full application, we communicate with everyone regarding decisions. So whether an application is being awarded, whether an application is being awarded a grant or not, we are in touch with applicants and offer feedback. So the reason that we have called this grant opportunity the ARPA funded primary producer grant is because it is really important to underline and highlight that these funds are federal funds that are available, that have been allocated to the Working Lands program. We are very grateful for them, but they have additional restrictions. So all of the general eligibility requirements for all Working Lands grants are applicable. So they're laid out here. Your business has to be based in Vermont. There's a variety of business structures that are eligible. You do have to be in compliance with state regulations. If you have been a previous recipient of a standard business grant or the COVID impact grant, you are eligible to apply for these funds. But if you have received a what we call the impact grant, so a supply chain or market level impact grant in the last 3 years, you would not be eligible to apply for these funds. And you can only receive one grant award per year. So for example, if you receive a business enhancement grant, you cannot also receive the ARPA grant this year. But there will be a second round of ARPA funded primary producer grants next year, which is good to note. All right, next slide. And in the next slide, we're going to be looking at the specific eligibility requirements that apply only to this grant opportunity, or specifically to this grant opportunity, I should say. Yeah, so this is, now we're really getting to the core of this grant. It is a grant that is very much focused on primary producers of farm and forest products. So that could mean that you are growing crops, that you are raising livestock, that you're engaged with maple sugaring, dairy, harvesting timber. Those are all primary producer activities. Your business also has to have been operational prior to January 2020. And this is because this is meant to be of support to businesses that experienced negative economic impact during the pandemic. So you had to have been in operation prior to the pandemic. And an additional eligibility criteria is you will have to explain how your business was negatively impacted economically due to the pandemic. The negative impact does not have to have, it doesn't have to have been sustained. It doesn't have to have been, that means long-term negative, a negative economic impact long-term. Maybe you pivoted and your business rebounded and got back on track. That you still would qualify, but you will be asked to explain how your business was impacted due to the pandemic. And there are some examples on this slide. And the last very specific eligibility is that if you did receive a Vermont COVID-19 Agricultural Assistance Program grant, you do have to apply for a different scope of work. So you can't, apply for the same project. I think we can go to the next slide. And the eligible projects are vast. As you can see in this list, you can invest in market development, you can invest in research and development, infrastructure, energy, workforce training and development. You can also invest in the processing of the primary products that you produce. Next slide. So I think the takeaway here is that this funding opportunity is more restricted. It is more restrictive than the normal working lands grants due to the nature of the source of the funding. And we've really tried to capture it right in the title. So this grant is focused on primary producers. Unlike, for example, the business enhancement grant that just closed, which is available to companies that are also adding value to forestry and agriculture products. And I don't think I specifically mentioned, but the grant, it was on the slides that the grant range for this opportunity is from $50,000 to $250,000. All right. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it over to Diana.
Hi, everybody. I'm Diana Ferguson. I'm a grants management specialist with the Agency of Agriculture, and really nice to have you all here today. I hail from Williamstown, and so I think my bandwidth is the one causing the delay in the slides moving along. So I'm going to turn my video off while I'm speaking. But I'm still here, and I'm going to explain a little bit of the more technical pieces of the grant application process, including how to arrive at new application in Arkansas. So to know about for applications, this, as Elizabeth mentioned, has been available since last week, and it's on the Working Lands website. I encourage everyone, if you intend to apply, to read it in full. If you haven't already, this is what it looks like on the front page. The RFA, it's also called an application guide, or in this case, a pre-application guide. And there's a lot of key information in this document. So don't miss it. It's got key dates, program information, all of the eligibility we just discussed, as well as the exact content that you will see in web grants when you're applying. So because the application, the pre-application doesn't open until next week on the 9th, if you read this document, you'll have the ability to get prepared for entering your responses, because the questions are there for you now. So a lot of folks find it helpful to start composing their responses in a Word document And then you can copy and paste them into web grants when you're ready to begin your application next year. There's also requirements in this document to help you get a sense of if you're awarded, what you'll be expected to complete throughout and at the end of the grant period. And then we also give you the scoring criteria for the pre-application, so you know what our reviewers are looking for and how much weight they're going to put on each component. Matching funds is
Hold on, Diana, let's
100%
Diana,
match.
hold on a second. Let's switch because you're breaking out. So your voice is breaking up a bit. Unshare your screen. Let me share and try my bandwidth. Is that, can you unshare? And then I'll share, and then I think your voice will come through more clearly.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Is everybody seeing my screen?
Yep, we can
I
see it.
can see
Okay.
it. If you could go to
Great.
the matching slide. It's a couple down.
Mhm.
Okay, so matching funds. So as I mentioned, the matching requirement is applicable for all working lands grants, and it's a minimum 100%, which means, for example, if you're applying for $100,000, we're anticipating that you will be matching $100,000 or more through your own funds. And your own funds can be a combination of cash or in kind. It could be all cash. Most folks have a combination where you are able to contribute funds from your business through cash flow or savings. Other grants that are not federally sourced, because again, ARPA is coming from a federal source, so the matching funds need to be from a local or a state grant rather than a federal source. Or other staff labor towards the project. So whatever you would be paying yourself to complete the work, to complete the grant requirements, counts as match towards your project. In-kind sources of match can include supplies or services donated from outside parties to your organization or towards your project, volunteer labor, that kind of thing. We do have, the board does review on a case-by-case basis requests for a reduction or a waiver of the match requirement. So in the case that your business isn't able to meet the minimum 100% match, the board will review your request as far as why your business isn't able to meet that minimum or needs if you need a full match waiver, those are considered even more carefully. So there is a place in the pre-application for you to indicate we can't meet the matching requirement and this is why, or in many cases, there are organizations who are waiting for responses on other grants or even for loans to come through. And in that case, you can just give the full explanation there of, for example, if this grant comes through, I'll be able to meet the match. If not, then I won't. Or I'm expecting a loan in mid 2023. And so as much explanation as you can give, then that helps the board to decide if the matching waiver or reduction can be approved. Okay, next slide, Elizabeth, thanks. Goals and outcomes are a critical piece of the application. So this is actually just sort of a preemptive note on this because they are not required in the pre-application, but we will be looking for a strong presence in goals and expected measurable outcomes for those who are advanced to the full application. So there's a minimum of 3 and a maximum of 5 goals and outcomes required in the full application. And this is a table just showing you an example of what that could look like, because there is this middle column you see called performance measures. So we encourage everyone to think about this at the pre-application phase to be prepared to, if you're selected for advancement, talk about your goals, performance measures, and outcomes for your project. And the board is going to be looking at, is the goal clearly stated, and what the measurement is for your goal. So you can see an example here, the goal being increasing annual production, and the performance measure being the unit and the item that's being produced. And then the outcome is essentially taking the performance measurement and putting a number and a timeline to it. So increasing the production of this item by this much in this time frame. So as specific as you can get. So something great to think about at this phase, even though you won't be asked until the full application. Waiting on the next slide to load.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries, I think it's taken everybody a minute.
Okay. Hmm. Claire, do you want to try?
Third time's a charm. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Is that
I
good
hope
for
so.
everyone?
Sorry about that, everyone. We're really struggling bandwidth-wise here.
That's because we're all such hard workers. Everybody's online working very hard right now, taking all the bandwidth. So scoring criteria, this is a breakdown of the number of points out of 100 that will be dedicated to each pre-application item. So quality and of your overall pre-application and the management team and your previous experience, making you as a business and your staff qualified to do the work, are, you can see the point values broken down here. Outcomes and impact. So it looks like this is also maybe most relevant to the full application, but business viability and budget are 15 points each. So this is adjusted a little bit from last year's impact grants, if you were familiar with those. Collaboration and financial need, demonstrating that you really need the funds to complete the project. So when you're in the application, you'll see questions related to if you don't receive these funds, what does the picture of this project look like for you? So are you likely to be able to complete it anyway? Will you struggle to complete it? And so the board's really hoping for a picture of where your business is now and where you're headed sort of with or without these funds. And so each of these scoring criteria categories is explained in more detail in the pre-application. So encourage everyone to take a look at that and cater your answers to that end. Next slide. Okay, so some really exciting information for you are the documents required. So the water quality compliance form is a simple yes, no, are you in compliance with state water quality standards? And it's an upload that actually appears in the pre-application. So take a look out for that. And if you don't have access to a scanner, then we recommend finding access to one so you can get that uploaded into your pre-application. There's also some documents on the bottom half here where our agency needs them to confirm that you are a primary producer of agriculture or forest-based products. And so we're looking for the cover page of your 2019 tax return that shows you've been in operations back to 2019 and or earlier. And then a profit and loss from 2021 and Schedule F, profit or loss, which is another tax form. So we put these here to encourage everyone to gather this information up so that you have it ready when you start your pre-application. Sometimes it's nice to be able to upload all of your documents first, or just get it out of the way as you're still preparing your narrative responses. And then some optional documents at the bottom that just help us to reconfirm your status as a primary producer, state issued licenses, water quality designations for large, medium, or small farm operations, and your your registration with the Secretary of State. So just a request to get yourself organized with these things. And again, this is more than the usual documents that are required for a working lands grant because of the federal funding source. So we just ask that everyone do their best to get these together. And then those required in the full application. So for those who are invited to advance your pre-application to the final round, we'll be looking for business financial documentation, and those documents are bulleted here. A business plan, current business plan. So if you're uploading something from 3 or 4 years ago, you're probably going to get a request for something more current. A business plan that sort of reinforces where you are and is something that shows and substantiates your project requests so that they're related and they make sense. Letters of support, at least one is required, and we're looking for another organization or agency or party to substantiate your request or say, I'm familiar with this business and I support their request for this project for these reasons. And then if you are requesting 150,000 or above, you will be asked to present a project pitch. So 5 minutes directly with the review team in a virtual setting to talk about your project and give us your best summary of where you're headed and why and what makes it competitive for funding. It's something that you can participate in as well if you're applying for the lower amounts, 50 to 150. And it's a chance for the reviewers and board members to hear directly from you about why your project is worthy of investment. So this is the final phase for those of you who may be awarded. And again, this is just preemptive to let everybody know that when the awards are made, when the emails go out, we immediately request these 2 forms. So the quicker you're able to provide them, the quicker we can get you your grant agreement and therefore your funds. So a current W-9 form signed in the last 6 months. The instructions for those provided by the IRS are pretty particular, and so making sure it's filled out correctly. And attachment C within the grant agreement, there's a link there. So we are going to send this PowerPoint so you can access this full document that outlines the requirements for insurance. And those are relevant for anyone who receives a grant or a contract with the state of Vermont. So general liability, automobile and workers' compensation, and the policy limits that are required. And then, of course, a grant agreement that's signed and executed before your project work begins. Okay, so I think, Claire, I'll need to switch back over to sharing my screen so that I can do a quick demonstration in WebGrants. So while I pull up my screen, I will just speak a little bit about WebGrants. It is the grants management system of our division, the Agricultural Development Division. It's been in use for about 7 years now for the working lands applications, and it's also the entity that we use to manage grants themselves once they're awarded. So some of you may be familiar with this system. If you applied for a grant more than 2 years ago, you might notice it looks different. It has undergone a software upgrade, but even though the look and feel is different, the functionality is the same. So if you are going to apply, just go ahead and bookmark Web Grants in your internet browser. And if you have applied in the past, please use the account that you have or your business already has to create a new application rather than creating a duplicate. The caveat there is if you have multiple users, if you have another staff member or friend or consultant helping you with the grant application, we would just ask that rather than sharing a login, that you each have your own login. And part of that is so we know who to reach out to, and we have all of your contact information as far as who is editing the application. You can have an unlimited number of application editors. And so that if you're awarded the grant, that everyone who is involved in managing the grant already has their own account and access to the system. So I'm going to do a quick demonstration of how to create an application. Once you've registered for Web Grants, you'll get an email with your login name, your username and password. Your username will always be first letter, last name, and then the number 1, and an auto-generated password that you can change yourself. So I will actually go into a test account and show you how to change your password, because if you'd like to have it to be something more memorable than a string of letters and numbers, then I'll show you how to do that. But this is the homepage or the dashboard of Web Grants. You'll have your name and status up here on the left, and these gray buttons on the left are really your navigational tools to help you get from one place to another. So for example, at the very bottom here, you'll see my profile, and that's a place where if at any point your contact information changes, address, email, or phone, you can go ahead and change it here. And if you here's the reset password button that's in blue on the right if you'd like to change it, and then edit my profile if you need to update any information. So in order to access an application, the first thing you'll do is go to Funding Opportunities on the left. And that will bring you a current list of all available funding opportunities offered by Agency of Agriculture within our division. And you see ARPA Primary Producer Impact Grant here at the bottom. It's currently in test mode, but it will say posted in green. And so you can see when I'm moving my mouse, it's highlighting the line in green. So anywhere within the row here, you can click on the ARPA Primary Producer Impact Grant. And that will take you to this landing page, which essentially is just a digest of what this funding opportunity is, the eligibility, a lot of the information we've already discussed. So this is just sort of a summary, but we recommend, of course, reading the whole pre-application guide. And there's some helpful attachments down at the bottom. So this I would call attention to as the most important, the Web Grants application guide. So even though I'm giving you a demonstration of how to access an application, I'm not going to walk you through the whole thing, but this link right here that ends in how to apply will show you a complete step-by-step process of how to complete an application. And there's a lot of things that aren't quite intuitive. So I would say to get familiar with this, and often it's helpful to have, your request for applications in one hand, your Web Grants application guide open in one window, and then your actual application open in another window. So if you stumble, you can click over here and say, okay, what am I supposed to do next? So that's a really helpful tool. So your first step, I'm going to go back up to the top, is to go over here on the right and click the green button that says Start New Application. This takes you to an application wizard, which is a lovely 3-step process that helps the system to build the backbone of your application. And the first thing you'll do is enter an application title. So you may enter your business name and something about the project itself, a short description of what you're proposing, and then your name or your username should appear here as the primary contact. If you have other users in your organization, you can select who should be the primary contact on the application. And then you click on the right again, Save Form Information, and that starts to save the beginning of your application. You'll see what you've just entered, and then now it's asking you, okay, you've already entered your project name, so you can disregard this box. but you will go down and make sure that your business name is correct. So organization, okay, that looks correct. Go ahead and save. Again. And then you're going to, the final step in the 3-step process is an optional step to add additional applicants. So if you're the only one working on the grant application, you can go ahead and save form information again. If you know that your friend or your employee is going to help you, you can click into this box that says additional applicants, and everyone in the system who's associated with your organization will be there. So you can select that you have a friend that you want to help with the application or whoever it may be, and then save form information again. And that's the most redundant but necessary step of creating an application. And now it will take you to what's called the application menu or application details. You'll immediately be greeted by this nice red error message that says you can't submit your application, which you are aware of because you haven't completed it yet. And then you'll see each of the form names in the pre-application here in the components menu. So general information is something you don't need to worry about. It's an automated form that populates with your contact information. It's automatically complete, so you're all set. The next thing you'll do is click on the first form, application information. You can click on the forms in any order because you can come back to any of them at any time, whether or not they're completed. And that will open an individual form for you to complete. And you'll see some red text and an asterisk. That means that that question is required. If you're down here and you see something in black text with no asterisk, that means it's not a required question, it's optional. And what you'll do is enter your information. Some of these forms are broken up into multiple sections, so you'll see an end. It looks like an end, but you need to scroll down to the very bottom of the page to make sure that nothing else appears. And when you've entered the information to your satisfaction, you can save the form. It should allow you to save even if you haven't answered all the questions. So like I said, you can log out, log in, come back as many times as you want to complete the application. Just make sure that you are clicking edit form to open the application form for editing. Otherwise, it just looks like you can't do anything here. So edit form, save form, and then when all your information in that particular form is finished and you don't need to edit anymore, then you can click mark as complete. And it's not going to let me because it's the items that are not finished, but when you're done, it will allow you to mark as complete. And then here at the bottom, you can go to the next form or the previous form using these blue navigation buttons. So if I go to the next form, then it's showing me, okay, project information. Now I've got a whole new set of questions to work on, save, continue editing. I'm going to click the back button to take me back to the application itself. The back button is a little finicky in web grants. As you can see, I just clicked it and it's not sure what to do right now. So a trick that a coworker taught me is to hold down the Alt button and click the left arrow button. So I'm going to do that right now and see if it helps. So if you hold down Alt and then click left arrow, it should just take you to whatever previous page you were on. And that prevents the disruption that sometimes happens with web grants because it's not a perfect system and sometimes it gets caught up or takes you to the wrong place. So once all of your forms are complete, you'll have a green check mark, just like you do right here next to general information. And then this red message will change to green. It will say application is in compliance and you may submit. And at that point, you will get an orange button here next to the preview button that says submit. And once you do that, you will receive a message or a page here that says your application has been submitted. And you should also receive a system generated email that says your application has been submitted. So hopefully there's no mistake. And then once your application is submitted, it can no longer be accessed. So just be sure that everything is finished to your satisfaction before you click that button. And then after the deadline, it goes into the review process. So that is a quick sort of rundown of how to complete a pre-application in web grants. And I'm going to turn it back over to Claire.
Great, thank you, Diana. So we have a list of resources here on this slide. On our webpage, we have a list of frequently asked questions that we're continually updating. So definitely recommend that you check there first. But otherwise, you're always welcome to reach out to me either via phone or via email. And my contact information is also on our webpage, and I'll put it in the chat as well. If you want to just stay up to date on funding opportunities, both for Working Lands and through the agency, there is a weekly newsletter that, again, the link is on our website. The Agency of Ag has a funding opportunities calendar that you can take a look at. We also have a list of some business counseling resources for you that you're welcome to reach out to partners that can provide counseling for your business, and some of that might include assistance with helping you understand the grant process or thinking through what makes a strong grant application. We also have an FAQ specific to Working Lands and Act 250, since many of or all of you applying will be primary producers and may be working on large projects that involve Act 250 and have questions about what that means for your grant application. There is a question on the application around permits you might be applying for, and that's really just for reviewers and the board to understand where you're at in that process, and like what other things, like what other help you might need, and kind of how that might impact your timeline for your grant project. It's not not a way to kind of provide additional like regulations around permits, just to kind of understand how those processes all fit together. And we know that it can be confusing. And then we also encourage you to follow us on social media. We are more active on Facebook, but our handle on both is @VT Working Lands, and we do our best to post updates and reminders around grants, as well as to share stories and photos of grant projects. And then just some quick tips for assembling a successful application. Probably the most important thing is just starting early. All of you that are here are starting early because you've come to this event, but especially for this federal grant, there are a lot of extra documents, and we know that it can be a challenge, and we wish that it wasn't complicated for everyone, but just making sure that you have time to get those in hand, get those tax documents, finalizing your project information for folks that are invited back to the final app, assembling that business plan and the business financials, working with your accountant or anyone else, just making sure you provide enough time. And then, like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions kind of about whether you're eligible, about what your project is, or just like if you don't understand something in the RFA. And Diana is also available to provide any support you need with web grants, to do a one-on-one walkthrough if you're confused about something. But certainly the earlier you reach out to us, the better. We try our best to be as available as possible up into the deadline, but we are not available after state hours and can't provide support, the night the application is due, unfortunately. And if you're working with any partners, setting up a meeting, making sure that everyone that needs to be involved is involved. Again, as Diana mentioned before, I think the most important thing is just reading the full request for applications and then taking a look at our FAQs for any initial questions you have. Having that web grants application guide that Diana linked handy is really important. Yeah, and like I said, I'm really available to set up a phone call with you anytime about general questions, and Diana can help with any technical aspects. Yeah, so that's kind of the very quick overview of this process, and I'm sure that many of you still have questions, and we have about 8 minutes left right now to answer any of them, so please feel free to put them in the chat, raise your hand, or simply unmute. And I'll put my contact information in the chat now as well. If you have kind of more specific questions, please feel free to just send me an email or give me a call, and I will get back to you as soon as I can if I'm not available right then. Since I know there can be lots of technical questions about whether your specific business or project is eligible. Yeah.
Amanda,
go ahead.
yeah, great.
Hi, good afternoon. Do we need is it a UAI number to apply for this grant?
You do not.
Do not. Okay.
You do not. We originally thought that you would. And we were, yeah, somewhat pleased that that is not a requirement.
I'll ask one more question since I'm on. So in terms of Act 250 permitting, what is the simplest way to figure out if your project would potentially kick off Act 250 permitting? And is that a budgetable item if it did?
It is a budgetable item. There is a line in our budget table for permit or like engineering fees that you might need. We are definitely, our team is not the best folks, the best people to advise on whether Act 250 is needed, but that would be the Agency of Natural Resources. On their website, and I can put that in the chat, they have a list of the district coordinators, so you can find out who your district coordinator is and contact them. And there's also a permit navigator tool on the website. Elizabeth, I think that's the standard information we have, right?
Yeah, I think the district coordinator closest to you in your region they are the experts, and they are ultimately the ones, in our understanding, that can advise as per what permits you will need. And in the RFA, there is a link to like a little question and answer document about permitting that restates that, basically that answer. And the links are in there for the contacts of the regional coordinators.
Okay, one more question. So in relation to the
Oh,
timeline.
and Claire just put it in the chat, which is
Okay.
great. So if you click on that, you'll be able to download that document, which gives more guidance around engaging with the permitting process.
Awesome. One other question in relation to the timeline of, because it has a start date of June 2023, correct? If it's approved. How does that overlap with permitting costs and timeline? Are there any variances in case? I'm not saying that we're going to kick off Act 250, but a little confused about that timeline, navigating that.
So you would want to try to include that, like the permitting process, in your overall timeline. So you don't have to have the permits in place at the start of your like grant period, but you want to plan for them, if that makes sense. So if the first 3 months or 4 months of your project are going to be applying for permits, finalizing permits, you should put that into the work plan. Does that answer? Is that what you were asking? Or
yeah,
okay.
That's very clear. Yeah. Thank you.
There's actually a question in the chat, which says, I'm going to read it just for everyone in case some folks aren't seeing the chat. Can you explain more about the negative impact due to COVID-19? What that looks like? You mentioned it doesn't have to be long term. What will the requirements be to prove the impact? So I think for examples, I guess first let's start with it does not have to be long term. It doesn't have to be like sustained negative impact. So an example could be that an input that you really count on for a period of time became very expensive due to the bottlenecks that were created, especially with imported items during COVID, and then they came back down. Well, that still negatively impacted your business for a number of months. That's an example. And the only way that you're going to be asked to prove the impact is through a narrative description. And so you want to provide a detailed narrative description of saying, you know, this is what happened in this month, and this was the economic impact of that. You know, loss of market, a need to share the way in which you're marketing, an increase of cost and inputs. What are other examples, Claire and Diana? I'm
Yeah,
blanking.
I think those are all good examples. I
Okay.
think just want to be clear that there isn't like a specific like dollar threshold of like
No.
income loss that you have to meet or like jobs lost, or there's not a specific threshold of impact that you have to meet. It's just providing a narrative explanation of what happened and that there was an impact and what that was, but it doesn't need to be a specific type or level of impact.
Ben.
Hi, thanks, everyone. My question is, can services used prior to a grant award be valued as in-kind match? For example, hiring an accountant or a business planner to help produce the documents that are required as part of an application. Can those services be valued and incorporated into a grant budget?
For the in-kind match, and for any match, it has to be, and for anything that you're requesting within your budget, all the costs have to take place during the grant period. And so technically that is once your grant agreement is signed, and so you're legally under contract with the state. So if you are continuing to pay an accountant throughout the course of your grant, if you are using services once you've signed your agreement and you're planning to, you can include those. But if, for example, the help that you're getting is to prepare your application, then that wouldn't be eligible for match in the application itself. There's only one exception, and that's if you need equipment or something that's a cash, and this isn't match related, just cost related. If you know you're going to need something as soon as you are notified in May and your project can't wait to start incurring costs even until your grant agreement is signed in June, we can make an exception that that those costs start to be incurred once you've received your award notification, because sometimes there's usually about a 4 to 6 week gap after you've learned you're receiving the grant to when you are actually underway with a signed agreement. So that's the only wiggle room we have, but great question.
Thank you.
Well, it looks like we are at time, and appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. We'll post the recording of this webinar on our website along with the slides, and the slides will have all of the links. And you can check it out there. And like I said, please feel free to reach out to myself for general grant questions, or Diana for any specific web grants questions or tutorials. Once you've had a chance to kind of look through the FAQ and the guide, if you're still stuck, please feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to talk things through. But thanks again for joining us today, and hope you all have a great afternoon.
I see that Ben is typing. I just want to give.
No, I'm dumb. Sorry, just stuck
Okay, I
in
just wanted
the
to make
type
sure you
box.
didn't have a follow-up question on the question you just asked and we're like cutting you off. Okay.
No, yeah, thanks for checking.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And we hope you apply.